Hi everyone, it is Easter Sunday, and so we have a special edition of Shift so that we could be together on this day. Before we launch into the session, let's take a moment to check in with one another. We're not doing this live, but hopefully some of us watching at the same time. So why don't you use the comments box to let us know you're here, let us know how you're doing. We can find ways to be connected in a different way today. Normally, I would say Happy Easter, but I'm conscious today that many of us are coming into Easter this year with a deep sense of sadness. It could be that you've been glued to the news and feeling thrown by the depth and the breadth of pain that so many people are experiencing. And closer to home, Covid-19 has taken many different things from many of us. Some losing the opportunity to finish a school year, others a event or a holiday trip that was cancelled. Some have lost their jobs. All of us have lost certain freedoms and things that we could expect, things that we could do, a sense of being connected to others. And then of course there are many, and perhaps some of you watching here today who have had to say goodbye to loved ones, who have lost people that you care about due to this virus. And so we come into Easter this year with a sense of grieving, a sense of loss and mourning. And really I was thinking about the story of Easter and how that story also starts in a place of grieving. It's a story that starts with women who are on their way to the grave of a friend who has died, on their way to say goodbye. And so as we look today at dealing with loss in a COVID-19 crisis, I'm really grateful that some mental health professionals were willing to speak with us. On Thursday night, just after 8 p.m, I had a Zoom meeting with Michelle Pittam, who comes to Shift, as well as her colleague Andy Williams, both of them from the Horsforth Centre. They had some really amazing things to share, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you now. So hi, Michelle and Andy, it's really good to have you here on my computer screen.
It's lovely to see you, Wendy, and thank you for inviting me, and hi, Michelle, as well.
I wonder if there are any things that anyone can do at home, most of us are at home, that can help us to process our grief and the things that we've lost in a time like this.
I think models of grief and bereavement have become a lot more flexible than they used to be, and the way I would I think the most helpful way of thinking about things is flexibly, and I was thinking about a dual process model. And what do we mean by that? What we mean is that we have one foot still in the past, in the bereavement and the loss, but we also have one foot in the future. And I think the skill is for the family or to be able to navigate these two processes at the same time and to be respectful to the other. What do you think about that, Michelle?
Well, yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, emotions for me have a purpose. So if we're feeling sad or angry or upset about something, then there's probably a good reason why that's going on. But when we think about processing grief, we need to spend some time with that. But also, like you're saying, have a step in the future. You know, there is a reality, a new reality that we have to get used to. And for me, it's about balancing the two out. And I think people will spend a bit of time maybe on one side more than the other, and then the next day maybe spending more time on the other than the one before. But I think it is that holding that balance, holding, I suppose, the respect for both parts, and also that people will process at different speeds, and they will also grieve over different things.
There's another really helpful way of thinking about grief and bereavement. It comes from a set of thoughts which are called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And at the heart of that is something about our values. What's really important to us? What gives us energy and motivation in life? What do we want to move towards? And this way of thinking is that in a way, if this fist represents, say, the pain of the loss or the bereavement, that is contained within life, and what we can think about is that perhaps that's going to remain the same, but maybe we can expand the envelope in which it is by looking at our values and what's important to us as a family or as an individual, and really start sowing into that, really prizing and making important what this is, but also really looking at other things and how we can fill the envelope with other things of value.
What might that look like in an ordinary day during lockdown? Somebody's just really hit them for the first time, or hitting them again, something specific they've lost.
I think there needs to be opportunity to grieve for it. You know, people put a lot of time and effort and planning, and as well as money, into arranging celebrations, whatever they might be. And a job loss is just huge anyway, isn't it? Especially when it's not planned. And I guess that loss might come in degrees as well. If somebody's been furloughed, but they don't know if they're going to have a job to go back to. You know, somebody who, say, lost their job, getting into, they've lost that structure as well as their job, but the structure might be a really important part of their day. So inputting a new structure would be really important to sort of keep everything ticking over, and allow that grief to then be explored and expressed, but without it taking over.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, sort of adding to what Michelle was saying, that there are sort of various pillars or principles that might be really, really helpful, in like permission to feel and to account. So the first thing is about permissions. You know, what permission do I need to take to really engage with this loss? Perhaps I come from a family where it's not traditional to be able to express sadness or feelings. That's really okay. And it's really important to find people to be in contact with where you're getting those permissions to experience. Ritual is very important as well. So maybe on your own or with others, working out what you might need to do to be able to say goodbye to the old and hello to the new. And then I was thinking about this idea about sort of going for a very small world in a way. You know, for example, like if a big birthday celebration or a wedding has been lost, that there's an enormous bereavement with that. But perhaps what we can do is we can make things much smaller and simpler. Someone the other day said they're adopting a Winnie the Pooh philosophy, and I said, what does that mean? And they said, just keep it very simple. I'm a bear who just likes honey, and I've got a friend called Tigger and Piglet, and I wander through the woods. And, you know, just keeping things very, very straightforward and taking delight in the smallest of things. And I guess in a way, Michelle, that's leading us towards a mindfulness way of thinking, isn't it?
Yeah, so mindfulness is about being in the present moment, but being in the present moment on purpose, with intent, and committing to that and focusing on that. So whatever it might be. There's a classic example of washing the dishes. You know, I don't know about you, but I hate washing the dishes, and I would rather be doing anything else. Mindfulness, what we'd be doing is we're really taking notice of the detail, like Andy was saying, of that experience. So noticing the temperature of the water, the feeling of the bubbles, the dirtiness of the plates, the squeak of the plates as they become clean, watching the soap come off at the other side. And that's not necessarily to go incredibly slowly. There's this sort of fantasy around mindfulness that you've got to do everything at a snail's pace. But it's just about noticing what's going on and noticing it on purpose in detail.
It's about being, purposeful, really, isn't it? It's about being effective, one mindfully, and most of all, non-judgmentally. So being able to contain one's judgment about a situation, about whether it's good or bad, and instead a situation being a situation that we're in. I mean, I think there's some lovely examples of mindfulness, Wendy, in the start of this evening. We're recording this just after the 8 o'clock clap for the NHS, and you know that in a way is a very simple ritual, isn't it? It's not in your background anymore, but there was a beautiful daffodil, a single flower that you plucked from your garden this morning, and just focusing on something like that here it comes, I think. So, you know, when's the last time that we've really spent some time with a daffodil, looking at the number of petals and what interconnects with what, and the joy of the colour and those sorts of ideas. And it's not a half glass full philosophy, it's more of a we are in this precious moment, and what can we actually access spiritually and psychologically and with joy in the second.
Kind of feeds on to what you were saying before about values as well, you know, and what we find important. And now we're being asked or expected to reevaluate what we find important, and that might be different to what we spend most of our time doing.
I wonder whether you have any tips on parents in particular. Is there anything you can recommend specifically for parents as they help children to grieve the things that they have lost?
Again, I think for me it would be about creativity. So thinking in a really creative way about what the loss is. So I think the temptation as a parent is that we want things to be all right for our kids, and in that process we might be sort of trying to settle things down. And I think the stage one for me would be the opposite, and letting things emerge. Talk to me more about your disappointment. What is it that you're really missing? What's, you know, and if we can almost sort of like operationalize what the pieces are, for example, not being able to say goodbye to our teacher, well, how might we do that in this more virtual world?
Because I'm in that same boat, so I found this question really difficult to answer, because it's like, well, if you do have any ideas about how I can somehow make his birthday amazing without any friends or any other members of his family coming around, which is what we do every year. You know, he'll have a big family party, and then he'll have a party with his friends, or at least a sort of event or a time out. But I think, you know, what is it that's actually missing? And also not missing for me, missing for him, which I think is quite an important difference. And I guess, you know, when I sort of think about it, it's maybe something about the specialness. The feeling special and the feeling important. Well, we can replicate that without too much difficulty. I imagine if it's something like a wedding or a wedding anniversary or something like that, maybe it's something slightly different. But I think asking that question, what is it that makes it important? What is it that's missing? I think is probably a good way into finding out, because it will be different for everybody, won't it?
We've spoken about various losses, but of course one of the most significant losses that many people are facing is bereavement. And I wonder whether you have a word of encouragement specifically for those who are facing bereavement at this time.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because it's just all the things that people would normally do in terms of grieving, a lot of those things have been taken away. And, you know, there's also something about being cheated, you know, particularly if somebody's died of a coronavirus related illness, or has gone into hospital for something totally different and then got coronavirus. There is something, I can imagine a lot of people feeling very cheated, and the unfairness of it, a lot of anger and unfairness around it. The only thing I would say about grieving is there's no right or wrong way to do it. There is what you are experiencing in the moment, and there may be, you know, ways of networking, ways of sharing grief. But I do think it's a really tricky one, really, really difficult time to be grieving.
It's such a personalised, dignified process, isn't it, that I wouldn't begin to think about, you know, suggesting how people might do that. I think what I would suggest is a sort of honesty of emotion, and even if people feel they can't do that with that they can do it with themselves. So, you know, maybe opening a journal up and labelling up 2 pages, you know, things and relationships that I do want at this moment, things and relationships that I don't want at this moment. I think there's something about identifying for yourself what you do want, and then gaining courage, you might be able to articulate that to others. And I know others would want to give you what you truly need and want. That would be my word of encouragement. Try and identify what you truly do need from others, and then risk asking them.
Yeah, thank you. Do you feel that there is anything about this, about the communal nature of loss and grief at the moment? Is there any way that that communal grief is different to individual losses in so-called normal times?
Well, I think there's something very shared about it, which presents both comfort and a shared group experience. But also, there's always the potential then to assume that people are grieving in the same way, or they're grieving over the same things, which isn't necessarily the case. Usually in a very well-meaning way. I guess that everybody will have an opinion on it. Everyone will have thoughts about it. And people will be at different stages and have had different experiences, particularly if they have suffered a personal bereavement. I know that some of the people that I've been working with have felt that they aren't able to talk to anybody about their fears about the current situation, because everybody's in the same boat and they don't want to upset other people. So on one sense unifying, and on the other sense maybe quite isolating.
But I do think there's a double whammy going on, because part of the grief process is the coming together of community. And at the moment we're having to learn how to do community in a very different way. So I think it's early days yet to know how we might support one another, because in a way many of us are not perhaps feeling very unified, or we might even be feeling quite cut off. So I think that's very difficult for people.
Andy, I believe that you have some resources that you might be able to share with us, which could be helpful for people in this time as they process their loss.
Yeah, Zoom's got this share facility, hasn't it? So, and I'll just go to it and see that clearly. So this is the Wellness Society. Here's a download. You can download for free, but this gives you an example of what the contents is. So it's got ideas about anxiety and stress and worry, and it helps us to look at feelings.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's some lovely resources at the bottom as well, about how to access some more uplifting news, I guess would be a good way to describe it. But I think there's a lot of people who are, really doing all the things that they never had chance to do, and are doing lots of posts around, I'm learning to play the saxophone or the piano, or I'm reading 20 books a day, or I'm doing all these blogs. And there's a sense of, for some people at least, of needing to do lockdown right. If you're not being amazingly productive, then you're not doing it right.
One of my clients gave me some advice. He said, I think what we should do is write 2 lists. One is everything that we ought to do during this time, like cleaning shoes and mending the attic and whatever it is. And then write down a list of everything that you'd love to do. And then you rip up the first list and do the second. And I know there's something delightfully rebellious about that, but for many people, I realise there's terrible potential loss and tragedy, but also there's possible opportunity and space, even if it's sad space, that we can lean in towards and see what we might do with it.
I've just had the thought of Anne Frank's diary, and her resilience within that dark moment. I'm not trying to compare this in any way, shape or form to what she experienced, but certainly that sense of finding the beautiful moments.
Well, Michelle knows that I come from a Jewish background, and my family, some of them survived the Holocaust and some of them didn't, and I was thinking about, moments like this, absolutely, don't they? They bring out the worst. So, I'm going to grab as many toilet rolls as I can. And they also bring out the absolute best in people. And so maybe the world, maybe there's a sophistication way, like life's a bit more sophisticated, like it's very dynamic, but we've got these two parts of ourselves at least, and they're very dynamic and very present. And maybe that's why we need to be people who are spiritual or of faith, because we need help with that dynamic process going on within us all the time. I notice bits of me where I want to fight for my family and, crush others in this time. And there's other bits of me that want to volunteer and help. And I think they're present almost in the same moment. So maybe that's the complexity of faith.
Thank you, guys. This has been really interesting. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Not at all.
You're welcome.
And it's a privilege to work with Michelle.
Finding beauty, noticing things, looking for joy. Andy spoke about the complexity of human experience, how it's not just the good and the bad separately, but how often those two coexist together. One of my favorite writers, Richard Rohr, writes that all of us are a mixed bag of contradictions. And the Easter story also is a story of ambiguity and contradictions, of paradox held together. The Easter story is a story of a group of people who are grieving. They're traumatized, they're uncertain, they're unsure, they don't know what to do next, but they do have to say goodbye to their friend. And so they're on their way to this tomb, to this grave, and as they're approaching the darkness, as they're nearing this place of death, walking through that valley, confronting their fears, they get there to the tomb, and instead of finding death, they find this empty space that's filled with the promise of joy. The Easter story is a story of these women who come to the tomb and they find that after darkness, there is light. That after sadness, there is joy. They go out into the garden and they discover there that after winter, there is spring. And they're looking for Jesus and they find that he has risen. This is the Easter story, a story that brings hope to so many people all over the world. And I want to say today that this Easter story, that's what brings me hope in my life, not only on Easter Sunday, not only when there is a global pandemic, but every time that I've been overcome with sorrow, and every time that my failures have gotten me down, every time that my hopes have been dashed, every time in my life that I'm looking for help and looking for hope, this story comes back to remind me that even the greatest darkness can be scattered. The worst chapter is never the last chapter. To remind me that even in my places of pain, I have a hope and a joy and a peace that I can cling to, that can surround that space and fill my life and give me something to live for and even something to die for. A friend sent me an email the other day. He's a Methodist minister. He lives in England, but he's South African. And the last word of his email was fussbait. Fussbait. It's an Afrikaans expression, and I'll tell you what it means. It means quite literally bite hard. But of course the phrase means more than that. Fussbait means perseverance. Fussbait means resilience. Fussbait means hold on, hang tight, because greater things are coming. And so as we think about the Easter story, and as we reflect on everything that Michelle and Andy have shared, and as we prepare to listen to a beautiful song by some members of our shift team, my encouragement to you is that you would bite down not only on some delicious chocolate Easter eggs today, but that you would fussbait and bite down to the hope that has been given to you, the hope for joy, the hope for peace, the hope for wellness and togetherness and unity, and the hope ultimately that this pandemic and all our human tragedies and suffering, and even death itself, the hope that all these things will be overcome.
How great the chasm that lay between us, how high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation I turned to heaven and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Jesus, yours is the victory.